All right, let's see if it actually does anything. Oh, it works! It works! Boy, oh boy, am I a glutton for punishment. I said previously I wasn't going to go any further with this Grom dash swap, yet here we are. But if I don't at least try, who will? As a quick recap, last time I took my 2015 Honda Grom dashboard and wanted to just simply plug it into the CRF harness because they have the exact same pin connector for the speedometer. I was hoping that everything would be 100% plug and play, and once I plug this in, everything will magically work, but the answer to that was no. Turns out there's a little bit more to it than that. Even though this has the same pin connection as the Honda Grom, as I'm sure it does with a lot of Honda motorcycles, all of the wires that go to the pin connector are completely rearranged. So of course nothing would have worked because it's not getting the right voltage, the right connections to talk to everything. Nothing's going to work. So we have to take it to the next step and actually depin this, rearrange all of the wires so that it better lines up with the Honda Grom dashboard. So we're going to do exactly that. But first we got to make our way to the back of the bike to disconnect that battery because we're going to be depinning this. We're going to have live wires. At least one of them goes directly to the battery. We don't want those to accidentally touch and have bad things happen. All right, now comes the fun part, depinning this thing. And this is the part that I was the most nervous about and why I didn't do it the first time. Because it's so small and the plastic in here can be so delicate, I didn't want to risk damaging this thing because with the usual OEM sources, you can't find this specifically. You just have to get the whole wiring harness. And there's no way I'm going to pay for a whole wiring harness. But I did the research ahead of time and actually found the website that has the manufacturer connectors for this, where you can buy replacements really cheap in case I break this. And I found, even more importantly, a schematic, which I'll show you on the screen right here, which is really important because this is very small and it's going to be hard to show you. There's two things to look at here when depinning and repinning these wires. Number one is the retaining clip for the entire pin connector that needs to be pushed out, and then within each individual pin there's a specific little prong that you need to pull out in order to pull the pin out and then repin, put in a new one. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. As you saw on the retaining clip, this is the retaining pin here, this black bar that you see across it. So first thing you got to do is grab a tiny screwdriver, smallest you can get, and then on the sides here are two little pins that you basically just push this in and pull up so it snaps out. You'll hear a click. And then it pops out. Now you can see it sticks out. It's not very far, but that's all it takes. So on each of these rows, there's two sections. There's this smaller section. It's really hard to see, but this is actually smaller. This is where the actual pin will connect to the dashboard. And then right here, the bigger side, that is the retaining piece. In order to get in there, I actually had to get a specialty tool, which is a safety pin. I found this really helpful because it's nice and strong and it tapers to a point. Basically, all you have to do with this is just get enough in there to pull on the plastic tab and pull it up. At least in this case, the direction is this way. So you're pulling up towards the retaining clip, and then you can pull out the wire behind it. Well, I smudged that, but that was position 9, the red wire right here. So we're gonna pull this one out first. So the pin is on the top here and it's pushing down. So what I'm gonna do is on this top row right here, the big portion, I'm gonna stick the safety pin, kind of sliding it down, keep it down just enough to get the tab, and then pull up like this. And then, I think I got it, and then I will pull on this side, just like that. That's how you depin it. So that's one down, about 14 more to go.
3 weeks later.
Oh boy, this took a lot longer than I anticipated, like days longer than I anticipated. Let me give you some of the experience, some of the tips that I would recommend, I would pass off to those of you that are going to try to depin this thing. First thing is the tools. Originally, I recommended using a safety pin, and I still recommend that with a slight modification that I'll talk about a little bit later on. But on my part, I messed up and I wasn't the most precise with it. I didn't quite know where the tabs were, so I got a lot of them mangled to the point where this and a bunch of other things were not cutting it. In fact, I even went ahead and bought this, a depinning kind of set, a pick set, and you can probably get one of these for other different pin connectors. I'm sure these are very handy, so I'll still link this in the description below, the exact ones that I bought. But for this purpose, these ones were just way too tiny, so actually ended up, after lots of fiddling, days of going back and forth with this thing, I ditched these and went back to the safety clip with a slight modification. So at the very tip here, basically all I did was hammered out the end of this just about a 1/8 of an inch or so, not a lot, just enough to get in there, but flattening that on both sides, it just makes the very tip of it just a little bit flatter while still keeping how thin it is and how strong it is, so that way you can get underneath that tab and pull it up to get the connector out as quickly and as easily as possible. Also, I highly recommend a magnifying glass or a set of helping hands like I have here. Again, because this thing is so small, just looking at it with your eye and getting your fingers in there, it's really hard to actually see what you're doing. So helping hands, magnifying glass really helped out. Okay, now comes for the really fun part, which is rearranging all of these wires in the pin connector to better suit the Grom dashboard. But I had to do my homework before I did this and took a look at the wiring diagram for both the CRF and for the Honda Grom, specifically the speedometer connector, which you can see here. And for the most part, it was actually kind of like connect the dots, really, because a lot of the wiring colors with these motorcycles are pretty universal. So obvious ones like the left and right hand turn signals, the high beams, the ground, the battery connector, all of that was pretty straightforward. A couple of them didn't have the right labels, but they had the same color scheme, and I traced them back through the wiring diagram to make sure that they went to the appropriate places. So things like the ignition and the engine source, all of that's perfectly fine. However, then we get to the wires that don't line up. We'll look at the CRF side first, which you can see is the red and blue one right at the very top, which is the fuel pulse. Now, I actually looked at the 22 plus Honda Groms, and they do have a fuel pulse, and I think what that is, which this has the capability of doing, is showing your average miles per gallon and your gallons left rather than just a fuel level bar, which the Grom only has. Then we get to the yellow-green wire, which, as you can see on the Honda Grom side, there is a yellow-green wire, but they serve different purposes. But unfortunately, the whole reason why you would want the Honda Grom dashboard in the first place is that purpose. On the CRF side, the yellow-green wire is clearly marked as temperature, so that one is the temperature light on the dashboard, just to show if you're getting too close to overheating. And then on the Honda Grom side, that yellow-green wire, unfortunately, is the tachometer. And I looked through the entire wiring diagram for the CRF to see if there was any way that that lines up with anything on the Grom side, if there was a specific place, a pin, a wire that was specifically tachometer on the CRF wiring diagram, but unfortunately, there's not one that I can find. Now, there is the 12 O'Clock Labs mini gauge, which I have here, which does plug into the wiring diagram and does have a tachometer, but it goes to the diagnostic port. Now, there's a couple of wires that pull out of the diagnostic port, the SCS and the K-line. I'm not exactly sure which of those two that it's actually talking to, and I don't know if it's just purely that wire that it's talking to, or it's interpreting the data that it pulls from that and then splicing out the tachometer from there, which I think that's probably the case. So I don't know if actually pulling one of those two wires and just directly lining it up to the pin for the tachometer would work. So it's not plug and play. Even though I haven't done anything yet and turned it on, I can tell you right now, the tachometer is not going to work. Sad, I know, but we're halfway through it, so we might as well just go all the way in and see what does work. I think everything else will work. I'm pretty sure it will turn on. The neutral light will work. I think the speedo will work. Maybe the fuel capacity will work too. So let's get the connections done on this. I will repin everything to the correct number and we'll see what happens. All right, here we go. Got everything wired up, minus these two, of course. Snap that in place. Now I'll plug the battery back in, put the key in, and flip the switch. All right, let's see if it actually does anything. Oh, it works! It's got the neutral indicator. It's showing an empty tank, so I don't think I got the fuel level thing right. Maybe I do actually need that fuel pulse thing. Let's kick it down. Cool, back into neutral. Neutral works. Is the headlight on? Headlights on. High beam. High beam works. Pass light works. What about indicators? Indicators work. Other side. The fuel level's freaking out. I don't exactly know what that is. Maybe it's some kind of check engine light, but I'm starting to think that the fuel pulse is actually what's needed and not the fuel sender positive. Maybe, I don't know. I'll have to look at that. Maybe I can try swapping them, but it might not be actually the right type of connections. Turns on just fine. If I spin this, do we get miles per hour? Okay, we got that spinning. Nothing. So nothing really important works on this thing. Yes, it does light up. Yes, it has a neutral. The blinkers work. Those are the obvious things, but it looks like nothing else is working. The fuel light is freaking out. Speedo doesn't work. So as that's spinning, It's got nothing, and then obviously there is no indication on here of a tachometer. Well, what did we learn today? Number one, you can repin this and actually get it to turn on and function. And number two, you can't get it to actually function the way you want it to function. So I'm ending this video like the last one, saying that it's not possible as is, but I'm also going to say that it might be possible for some other circumstance. The other thing I was thinking about with this was, rather than using the old school dashboard from the 2015, is the new model, the new generation Honda Grom CRF300 dashboards that have more similar capabilities of the CRF dash. If you have a dashboard and maybe are in the San Diego area and you want to lend that to me and you don't mind your bike being out of commission for a couple of days, maybe hit me up. Otherwise, I'm leaving it at that. See you next time.